All right, folks, it's after 5.
Get your gavel. Get your gavel.
I know.
I never listened to Melissa and Bill last week.
It's after 5, folks. Can we hold it down?
I've been working on it my whole life.
This is a meeting of the Tremont Board of Appeals. We will start with the members identifying themselves.
David Edson, Bernard.
Marcia Madeira, Bernard.
Mike Hayes, alternate Bass Harbor.
Mel Atherton, Bass Harbor.
Richard Cohen, Tremont. We have a quorum. We have an agenda. Any questions about the agenda or additions? The motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. We have minutes of the June 22 meeting. Any discussion about them necessary?
Move to accept.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Unanimous. Okay, our business today is the Pointy Head Campground. Mr. Edson and I have not been in this case from the beginning. We've brought ourselves up to date on it. If council want to come forward, you may, or you can wait. But do you have any comments on Mr. Edson and my participating?
No, this is a new application, really. Anything that,
Yeah.
you might familiarize yourself generally with what's going on, and this was a fresh.
Fine, very good. Mr. Atherton has something to advise us of.
I operate a vacation rental business down the road from this issue, and I didn't know whether that would represent a conflict of interest. I'd be willing to recuse myself if anybody would like that.
That's a matter that the board will decide, but if council have any views that they'd like us to take into account, now would be the time.
I appreciate the opportunity on behalf of the appellant or applicant. I guess my question would simply be, and I'm sure one of the board members will ask, whether you can have an open mind and judge this fairly.
Could you say that again, please?
I think that the standard will simply be whether you have can judge this fairly, and nobody can really inquire much more deeply than that. I've learned in 35 years of practicing law that it certainly doesn't behoove me to challenge a board member unsuccessful. I rely on the board members to basically come to the meeting with an open mind, regardless of, in your case, having a vacation rental business. Unless it's the common term glamping, it's not a direct competition of ours. I really don't have any concerns.
It's not a glamping establishment, and I feel I have an open mind and can give an equitable judgment.
Dan Pelleggi for the neighbors. I don't have any concerns based on what I've heard.
Anybody on the board have a concern about this? Do we need a resolution? Okay. Okay, what I'd like to do is ask council to follow the following format. Starting with Mr. Barrett, who will have 15 minutes, of which he can reserve up till 10, up to 5. Then Mr. Pelleggi, and after that, if you've reserved time, you can use it, and then we'll let the public have a few things to say. Okay?
That's fine. That's fine.
You may proceed.
Thank you very much. My name is Ed Bearer. I represent Pointy Head, in particular Madeline Brogdon, the owner of Pointy Head. She's seated here right behind me. For those of you who are familiar with, or not familiar, I should say, let me just describe where this is. It's just down the road. Pointy Head, I think, is a fairly well-known area side of the road where her house is. And the development that was proposed, is still proposed, is for up to 15, I think it is, the number of sites in the fields behind her house. The only issue that the planning board deemed we failed to ring the bell on was access. Everything else, we prevailed. We met the standards. We bent over, gave a lot, planting a lot of trees, very large trees, doing everything that we can to fit into the neighborhood, or not be seen, I guess, is probably a more accurate way of describing it. Not be seen, not be heard, not be smelled. All of those things came up. So, access, as I understand it, and I appreciate that the planning board made an effort to clarify its rationale, but as I understood their final decision, they concluded that our, and I'm gonna use the term driveway or road interchangeably, the access from the road to our property was non-conforming, and that our use of it in connection with this project would be expanding a non-conforming use. And my argument is simple, and I won't even need the 15 minutes that you gave me, Mr. Chairman. A non-conforming use is something that may have been permitted at one time, but now an ordinance has passed, and it makes that use not permitted any longer, not allowed. In your ordinance, in the Commercial, Maritime, and Fishery District, which is where the first portion of our property is, if you all know, you can just nod if you have a sense of where this property is. Basically, the line is near the house, the 250 feet of shoreline is there. So the driveway is in the Commercial, Fisheries, and Maritime District. When you look at your land use ordinance, and when you look at the table of uses that are allowed in the Commercial and Maritime District, it allows for existing trails and roads. It doesn't say that that trail or road has to be used in connection with anything else, and all the activity that we're talking about is outside of the shoreline zone. So, since it's allowed, it's simply not a non-conforming use. And I think the planning board got really twisted around the axle, and not to steal Mr. Pleggy's thunder, he's probably gonna make some of the same arguments he did before, but the basic principle here is that we are not a non-conforming use. Our road, our driveway is not a non-conformity, so therefore, the whole notion that we can't use it for this purpose it just doesn't follow. It's just not the case. And so, I believe that although your ordinance says that you can only overturn the planning board if they clearly erred, or if the decision is clearly contrary to the provisions of the ordinance. That's a high standard, I realize that. And you might think I'm arguing against myself here, but I'm not. Because it's just plain as the nose on everyone's face that the road is there, the road has always been there, and that it is a permitted use in the Commercial, Fisheries, and Maritime District. The planning board just got it wrong. That's all I.
Thank you. Daniel Pelleggi for several of the abutting landowners. I want to start with a few of my minutes tonight to point out that on behalf of the people that I represent, we also filed an appeal. I understand that this board might, how this board deals with that appeal will depend on how you deal with Mr. Bear's appeal. But it was not on the agenda for this evening. It wasn't posted or noticed. And that is an impediment to going forward if either side chooses to go forward after the Board of Appeals. So we're just gonna have to address that. I don't think we can tonight without agreement. But it hasn't been noticed, and it's just one more thing we've got to take care of.
Let's see if we have agreement. Mr. Bear, how do you feel about that? And it never occurred to me. I saw the one, I thought it was both before us.
I am not prepared to argue against that appeal this evening. That really is an appeal where it's heavy with paper, unlike this simple
I
interpretive
understand.
thing. So I'll be giving you all of our wetland stuff to support the planning board's decision, so I can't do that tonight.
Not ready on that appeal either.
Yeah, okay. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. I appreciate you listening to me about that. I want to start briefly, burden of proof. I know I've seen most of you here before. You're aware that the applicant bears the burden of proof, and that burden is to prove that the planning board's decision was not contrary to specific provisions of the ordinance or contrary to the facts presented to the planning board. As Mr. Bear said, it's a very high standard. Under Tremont's ordinance structure, it defines driveways and roads differently. The land use ordinance defines a driveway as a vehicular access way less than 500 feet. We know this is only 250, serving 2 single-family dwellings or 1 two-family dwelling or less. That's a driveway. Everything else, every other vehicular access way that serves more or commercial uses is a road. So you can't use them interchangeably, those terms, because your ordinance doesn't let us use them interchangeably. What is currently at the location is a residence, a single-family residence. That, under your ordinance structure in the Marine Maritime Activities Commercial Fisheries Zoning District, is a non-conforming use, unless it's attached to a maritime use, and this one isn't. So it's a lawfully pre-existing, non-conforming use. It's allowed to be there because it was there before the district was overlaid on top of it. What can happen is it can't be expanded. The driveway serving that house is the same access way that the applicant wants to access a commercial campground on the land behind the house. By definition, that is using the commercial fisheries maritime activities zoning district in a way that doesn't serve a maritime use, and it transforms and expands the road, expands the driveway into a road by definition under your land use ordinance. In addition, as part of the traffic queuing remediation plan that the applicant had, how to avoid lines of cars on Bass Harbor Road, how to do sight lines appropriately, stuff like that. They are widening, this plan talks about widening, expanding the existing driveway, not just into a road, not just use-wise, but physically. They're adding wider aprons, they're adding a wider parking area, improving a wider parking area near the house. They're adding signage, they're doing things that are expanding the existing structure in place, the road, driveway, road, expanded road. The planning board correctly reviewed all of those facts and understood that what was happening was that this use that was lawfully non-conforming, driveway serving the residence, was being transformed into a road in the commercial fishery maritime activities zone. Are roads allowed? Sure, but they have to be attached to a maritime use. That's the rule within the maritime activities zoning district. I've submitted written materials that discuss that in detail, but the fact is that this zoning district overlay, it's within the shoreland zone, subject to shoreland ordinance regulation. It is a state-permitted expansion of shoreland protections to protect traditional maritime commercial industries. And so the only reason that you get to use your land within 250 feet of the ocean in these overlay districts, the only reason it's developable at all is to preserve maritime commercial activity. this proposed use, had it been commercial maritime activity, would have been allowed, hence your table of uses. It isn't. It is a campground. There's no way to spin that, and the planning board correctly found that the use was not related to traditional maritime activities. So where does that get us? It gets us to the fact that we're now creating a road, changing a driveway into a road, expanding it physically to serve a non-maritime use. Now, that non-maritime use is kind of different zoning district, but that road is being used for a purpose that's not maritime. The planning board correctly found that under both the site plan review ordinance and the land use ordinance, that expansion of the driveway into a road and the physical expansion of the driveway was an expansion of the non-conforming use. I think that's a correct analysis. The facts aren't disputed. The definitions are your ordinance definitions, and they're not interchangeable. And based on that, I'd ask that you uphold the planning board's decision, because it's not clearly contrary to the ordinance. And again, the facts aren't disputed, they are what they are. Thank you.
Mr. Barry, you reserved about 13 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So, the only area where the configuration of this driveway changed, and Dan made one mistake in his presentation, and that was, there's a turnout area near the house that's off the hill. I think that the planning board found that existed. People tried to argue otherwise, but the only area where there's a change in the driveway, in the road path, or you want to call it access way, is within the DOT right of way. Okay, so the DOT right of way, and you had to apply with DOT to get approval. You basically just put in an apron like this, so that people can turn more easily left, turn more easily right, come in more easily from the other direction. So that's the complete extent of it. There's nothing in your ordinance that if you have the land use ordinance, the table looks like this. And under the land uses in the shoreline zone, motorized vehicular traffic on existing roads and trails, yes, that's allowed. It's a yes right there, and that's all. It doesn't say what uses that road leads to or anything of that nature. It simply says motorized vehicular traffic allowed. So the whole notion that this driveway or road is non-conforming is hooey. It's simply not. We don't need to make this any more complicated than it isn't. There's nothing in this ordinance that prevents us from using this access way to access our property. She's got 15 or more acres back there. It's the only access to her property. The suggestion here is that she is precluded forever from doing anything on her property that's something other than a maritime use. I mean, this thing, this access way, is as big, as wide, meets the standards, this document's in the record, meets the standards of your, of a road as described in your ordinance. The ordinance was adopted in May of 2021. The right-of-way is wide enough, the grade is sufficient, the tangent, curves, etc. meet the standard, the minimum angle of road intersection is met, the grade of the intersection is met, site distances are met. So simply saying, no, today it's a driveway, tomorrow it becomes a road, because the definition of driveway only contemplates residential uses, I think is a misnomer. But more importantly, it's not a non-conforming use to have a road in the commercial and maritime district. So it seems pretty straightforward to the planning board here.
Anything? Done?
Only that, as this board knows, the table of uses isn't the only authority. The table of use is a shorthand reference. If you look at the rules and requirements that are set forth in the land use ordinance for the CFMA overlay district, it expressly says that uses need to be maritime, and accessory uses need to be connected to maritime use.
All right.
I have a question.
Not quite yet.
Okay, sorry.
I'd like to hear from the public first. Both these lawyers have clearly presented the two sides of this case, but if there's anyone who feels the need to add one side or the other, now is the opportunity. Okay. Marcia?
Does the land use ordinance say that the maritime goes all the way back, the whole 15 acres, or is it just?
No, there's a line on the plan that the planning board has, the maritime district is 250 feet from the shore. It's roughly equivalent to where the house is on the lot. And what's behind that is residential.
Rural business, residential.
RV.
business,
Let me ask you this. The basic proposition, I'm confused by, if it is that I can have an off the road conforming use, but the road frontage is of a different zone, and I need to get back to my conforming use. But when it goes through the other zone that is nearer the road, it cannot, let me state it differently, it's a non-conforming use. I don't get that. I have a problem with that.
Okay, so if you're directing that to me,
Well,
okay.
We happen to lock eyes, but you both get a chance on that.
You can go first because I think that I agree with the chair.
So the way that it works is that the zoning overlay applies. It applies to all of the uses within the overlay. If you don't have access, the same thing essentially is having, if you want to have a non-maritime use on the back land, your options are to get a variance or apply for a variance if you qualify, or to get access another way.
And if both of those aren't likely, what do? You end up with a piece of property that has to conform to the front zoning?
Yes.
So you have 15 acres or whatever it is, and the majority of it is in a residential zone, but you can't use it for all of the purposes permitted in a residential zone because you can't get to it.
Because essentially land is like buying landlocked property. Sure. It happens all the time.
But here is a residence already. It's an existing driveway. You can keep using it as a residence.
I agree.
It's not valueless.
I agree with that.
Well, it's not a question of values. Okay, anyone, yeah, Mike?
A couple of questions. First of all, I'd like to hear agreement that its current use is as a driveway.
I won't agree.
Based on the definition in the town of Tremont's land use ordinance, it's a driveway. It talks about what constitutes access to essentially a dwelling unit. And it's either a duplex or it's a single-family residence. But that's a driveway, correct? I mean.
Well, it provided access.
No, don't talk about access. Definition of a driveway in the Tremont land use ordinance seems to me to be very, very specific about the uses that it serves. Correct?
I don't disagree with you.
But do you agree with me? I guess that's the question.
It's a matter of semantics.
No. I don't think it is.
Well,
Does it currently attach to a single-family residence or a duplex or two single-family units,
The answer is yes. Okay? It
which
does.
means it's a driveway.
Well, maybe that's what it means. However, no, but why don't, do you want me to finish or you just?
No,
want-
no, no, I really do, I really do.
Thank you for that. So, it meets the standards of a road. It may go to a house, but it meets the standards set forth in your ordinance for a road. I just read those to you. So, calling it a driveway because it goes to a house, yep, I can't disagree with that analysis. But the fact is that it's a road. But more importantly, it's built as a road. It meets your standards, whether your standards are inadequate or not, I don't. I have no opinion on that. But it still is not a non-conforming use.
Mr. Bear, could you tell us there's a land use ordinance section you mentioned that permits roads and something else in the front zone, whatever it's
Right.
called.
Fisheries, just call fisheries.
Fisheries?
CFMA, but fisheries will do.
Yes, so the section of the ordinance where this is found, and it's known as the table of land uses. And it comes at the end of all of the descriptions of the various zones, the rural zone, the island protection zone, this zone, that zone. And it looks like this, it's a grid. For those of you who have an ordinance available, trying to give you. It's Article 4, Standards of the Zone. Article 4, in my version of this ordinance, which is the 2020 ordinance, I don't think it changed, you'll find it on page 19. And it lists the land uses, a whole bunch of them, 33 different uses, and the zones. And it tells you yes or no, or yes, you need a CEO permit, or yes, you need a planning board permit. And with motorized vehicular traffic on existing roads and trails in the CFMA district, which our first 250 feet is, well, it's not even 250 feet because we own the other side of the road to the water. It's yes, you can have a road, period.
And that is not referred to in the text portion of the ordinance that describes permitted uses in the fisheries zone. Am I right about that?
In the fishery zone, give me just a moment. The following uses are allowed: all maritime commercial uses, non-maritime limited commercial use up to 2,000 square feet in total building area, provided it is accessory to an existing maritime commercial use. All functionally water-dependent industry marinas up to 550 feet of slip dock space.
None of that helps you.
No, none of that specifically helps me. But I'm sure as you're aware, Mr. Cohen, when there's ambiguity or confusion in an ordinance, and I would suggest to you that the unambiguous language says that this use is allowed, that there's a countervailing language that we just read that would suggest you can only do those things, but you have to construe it in favor of the landowner.
Didn't you, sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
didn't you start out by saying something about existing roads and driveways can stay there in the start of your presentation?
It says motorized vehicular traffic on existing roads and trails. That's the
That's-
use that I'm relying on.
That's an allowable use
Yes,
on existing trails.
existing roads and trails.
Let me ask you this. Both. at some point, somebody who was in charge of this ordinance decided that it was important to distinguish between driveways and roads. And I take it, and if you disagree with me, let me know now, that designating something as a road doesn't necessarily mean it becomes a public road
Not at
with,
all.
with public access and public maintenance and all that stuff,
Correct.
right? Okay.
So normally.
And then,
Sorry, go ahead.
and then they decided that driveways were only for single-family houses or a duplex. What were they thinking about? Why do that?
Because.
What is that all about?
I think it's because the construction of a driveway is much less expensive and intensive than the construction that might be necessary if you're accessing more than 2 or 4 homes or a
Okay,
commercial
so
activity.
you think all they're interested in is percentages of fall and width of right-of-way and that sort of stuff?
I do.
Okay. Mr. Pellicka, you agree?
I don't know what what the voters were thinking when they did this.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't care, because we're bound, all of us are bound by the words of the ordinance. We can't think about purpose, we're not allowed. So I wanna point out that the table of uses, it refers back to the zone criteria. It doesn't stand alone in the ordinance, it is a subset or a portion of section 4 of the land use ordinance. And 4E1 and 41 essentially sets forth the rules for the marine activities, commercial fisheries zoning district. And it specifically refers, it's crystal clear, unambiguous, that that district is confined to uses that are, I'm quoting, functionally marine dependent. The only exception to functionally marine dependent uses are for limited commercial use of up to 2,000 square feet, this is bigger. If accessory to an existing maritime commercial use, and only for as long as the maritime use continues. That's out of your ordinance in section 4E1B. This isn't any of those things. And so then we look at the table of uses, and it says roads and trails. This isn't a road, it's not a trail, it's a driveway. So by all measures, by the words of the ordinance, we have to live with the words of the ordinance because the voters decided that those are the rules. By the words of the ordinance, what the applicant wants to do here is not anything that's permitted.
In the language you just quoted, does the word road mean the informal road that we're dealing with here, or does it mean public road?
No, roads defined, both road and driveway are defined in section, I think it's 11 of the ordinance.
Yeah.
And the road definition is everything that a driveway isn't, whether it's public or private.
May I be heard?
Yeah.
Thank you. So when we filed our appeal, I included a copy, excuse me, of a letter from Assistant Attorney General Caleb Elwell. It was attached to my file here. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I probably still haven't reached my 15-minute mark. It won't take me long, but I'd like to read the letter, if I may.
Okay.
Dear Mr. Bearer, the Attorney General's office is writing in reference to the above-mentioned application on behalf of Maine's Department of Environmental Protection to provide guidance on the application of DEP's mandatory shoreline zone guidelines to this matter. The application proposes to create a commercial campground within a residential business zone district. This activity is an allowed use in that district. The applicant proposes to use a pre-existing driveway that passes through an area designated as commercial fishery and maritime activities zone to facilitate motor vehicle traffic to and from the proposed development. The proposed development will not necessitate any enlargement or alteration of the pre-existing roadway, which will be able to accommodate any increase in motor vehicle traffic as it exists currently. The town of Tremont has adopted a land use ordinance which governs development and use of the shoreland areas as required by 38 MRS section 438A. The town's ordinance provides a table of land with respect to the different zoning districts established by the ordinance. The land use table provides under use number 2 that vehicular traffic on existing roads and trails is permitted without a permit in all land use zones. In all land use zones. Because vehicular traffic on existing roads and trails is expressly allowed without a permit within the CFMA zone, the fact that the proposed development will result in vehicular traffic on the existing roadway within the CFMA district does not result in the need for the applicant to receive a permit, as the application does not propose to construct a new road, but merely utilize the pre-existing road. No permit is required. So I think what he's telling us is that if you needed a permit for your activity, but you don't need a permit for a road, you'd have to jump through those hoops. But he was commenting on our proposal, and addressing, I think, the issue that's in front of you now, permitted use.
I bet you want to answer that.
So the Attorney General has no more authority than Mr. Bear or I do to tell you guys what to do. He's also using road and driveway interchangeably, which your planning board didn't do because your planning board used your ordinance definitions, and your planning board was right. The Attorney General and Mr. Bear can't use, you're not allowed, in the town of Tremont, you're not allowed to use road and driveway interchangeably. And just by saying roadway it's not a bridge from one to the other. The Attorney General's opinion was the same as mine. If there's an existing road, maybe you can use it. I still argue you have to overlay this maritime activity zone right here. But even if you don't, this is changing a driveway to a road.
If I remember correctly, the applicant originally applied for this project without any physical change in a driveway,
That's true.
right? And it was after objections were raised that the traffic was gonna back up to Soamesville, that,
Other way, but yeah.
they decided, okay, we'll solve that problem. So they've created their own problem. I mean, it's like a catch-22. If it's a driveway, there's gonna be traffic backed up, and if it's a road, you've got a zoning.
No, it's a road no matter what. The second it serves a commercial campground, it's a road under your ordinance. It doesn't matter what you do with it physically. I was pointing out that they are doing something physically to expand it. I don't think it matters.
Okay. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yeah, Ed?
Under a letter that Hedifine submitted October 26, 22, Mr. Watt referred to reaching out to the Maine DOT, and did a formal approval come through for that, or is that pending?
I haven't talked with Alina since we filed this appeal, so I don't know.
I have a question pertinent to that.
Yeah.
Does the Maine DOT decide what a town's land use ordinances say and don't say? Are they more concerned with safety of whatever goes in? I mean, are they a legally authorized body to say this is what your land use ordinance means?
I don't think that they tell you what your land use ordinance means, but you do need to get approval from the DOT.
Right, but their issue is safety, as I understand.
Accessing the property.
Right, but safety primarily, right?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I think their primary objective is movement of traffic.
Okay,
Safely, yes, I would assume so.
okay.
Incidentally, they're gonna be digging up that whole area, I understand, to rebuild the area that's next to the harbor. It has nothing to do with this application, but they've announced a building project that's coming for you guys.
I think they'll do it as fast as they've worked in Southwest.
In my lifetime.
They've already approached people for eminent domain issues.
Oh, is
It's
that?
coming, yeah.
Oh, my God. Okay. All right, the public portion of the
I
meeting.
want to ask a question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
In the motion, it was mentioned, I think, about queuing. Either one of you want to talk about queuing? the planning board seemed to think that they were upset about queuing. I didn't see any evidence one way or another from anybody that there was gonna be queuing.
Yeah.
I think that was in the motion.
So two issues. They denied this under both the site plan review ordinance and the land use ordinance. The provision you were talking about was their denial of the access into site provisions under the site plan review ordinance. So they denied both. And what they said, they used the same reason. They said that the board had concerns about queuing, which has caused the expansion plan.
Yeah.
And then, I don't even know why that sentence is there, because then they said access to the campground through the CFMA district is an unlawful non-conforming use. 'Cause the-
So does that mean that they turned it down because they were worried about queuing? I didn't understand that.
Yeah, so I think it's a remnant of a prior finding. There's some confusion that happened earlier, and then they sort of changed their mind, but apparently left that last sentence. Did I get that right?
I think you got it right. In October, they were critical of our access when they were going through the review criteria, and determined that we could have a queuing problem. And I asked for an opportunity to be able to address that at the next meeting, and at least board member with him, there's the others, that since they had sort of sprung this on us, we hadn't gotten any feedback beforehand at the site visit or application stage. We did. So we submitted something in November, and you'd have to watch the tape, and access to the town's website has been spotty lately, but if you were to look at the tape, they discuss all the changes. We spent a long time doing that. And then two of the members, what's his, Wilson's first name? Lawson, and Brett, said that they didn't have any concerns, but they never went back and rescinded that earlier vote.
So is it true in general, without holding to the particulars of it, that the thing you mentioned earlier about adding some sort of apron or something, likely to carry that queuing
Yes.
because you're gonna be able to pull off and have
So-
room to get in?
Yeah, we did that, and we proposed signage, no left turn, no right turn, whatever it may have been.
So that's your understanding too, Dan, that basically that is a non-issue?
I don't think the board ever voted on that it was a non-issue on that queuing thing, but the board members, it's correct that the board members expressed less concern about the issue, but then went back and voted on it.
Because
It was clear to me, James, that their intent in denying under the site plan review ordinance had to do with the issue we're talking about.
see, the
Not
reason,
queuing.
the reason I looked at that and I thought that's weird, because they didn't say what you would normally say, which of course is, we had evidence from these four people who talked about
Yeah.
queuing, and then we had this, and so then we're making the motion. So I thought, well, why did they include that? If they didn't include the evidence, the facts to go with it.
Right.
Good, thanks.
All right. I've got to go back to something. I'm going to be boring, I'm afraid, but I'm stuck on something. And that is this. Are we all satisfied that Maine law is that if you go through a zone to get to a back property that's in a different zone, that the access way to get to the back is non-conforming? Is that, your case is based on that, is it not?
My case is based on the fact that any use of a zoning district has to be in conformance with that zoning district's rules.
Well, is that different from what I just said?
It's not always non-conforming, because it could be residential use along the road that allows for
No, I'm
roads.
talking, but that isn't the.
Yeah, it's not the case
hypothetical.
here. Under the case here, yes, you're right.
Yeah, okay. Are you, Mr. Bear, are you satisfied that's the law?
Can you state your proposition again for me?
Okay. I've got property, and the front of it is in zone A. The back of it is in zone B, and I'm using it for a use that's not permitted in zone A. And I'm using an access way to get to the back portion. Is the portion of the access way that goes through the front zone, zone A non-conforming use?
No.
Okay, You disagree on that then?
Yes, I
Oh,
do.
okay.
And I can, by the way of example, I represented, if you're familiar with where Varney GMC is on Open Road and Hope Avenue in Bangor. But the neighbors there were vehemently opposed to the construction of a car dealership there. And the city council imposed a government institutional district strip along Mount Hope Avenue, which would have prevented us from accessing our commercial property if what you're saying would hold true, that you can't cross one zone if the use that you want to get to is not allowed in that zone. And if you go there today, you'll see that they do have a driveway, and that there was unsettled law at the time, and I don't know of any case law that suggests that you can't travel over a zoning district where the ultimate use you're accessing is not allowed in that district, that you can use your property for that.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me that the answer to this puzzle turns on the answer to the question I'm asking. Whether or not an access way through Zone A in the front to get to a permitted use in Zone B that's not permitted in Zone A is a nonconformity. James, you got anything?
I'd prefer to, if the chair would like to close the public hearing, because if I say anything,
I
these
did
two are.
already.
I didn't think you did, I think I interrupted you earlier when you tried to.
Oh, but-
Because I don't want these two to get back and to get more comments in on what I have to say.
Chicken.
You don't want these two to comment on what you said?
No, I don't. Because they're not gonna, neither one of them's gonna like it, so we wanna talk about it.
Okay, I can't wait for this. Public portion of the meeting's over.
Good. So, I've given a lot of thought. I've consulted with, I don't know, half a dozen other lawyers, you know, without the specifics of the parties or anything, some of them down below Kennebec. There's no clear answer to this. I don't know of any case law. Mr. Pelleggi is always very persuasive in the 24 years I've known him. Mr. Bear is one of the most experienced zoning lawyers in the state, been to the law court dozens, if not hundreds of times. I can see it both ways. On the one hand, the thing about the state law which interests me is the DEP has these overlay zones, like, you know, in Southwest they only have 2 or 3 zones, and then they have a bunch of overlays. I think it's 2 and 3 overlays, so they have 5. And the DEP's idea is not to tell you how to run your town, but they will tell you how to do an ordinance. And in fact, when you do a new ordinance, you have to give it to the DEP and have them approve it. So while the guy doesn't have any direct say in this, Elwood or Caleb Elwell or whatever his name is, it's persuasive to me. I don't think it's you know, it doesn't settle the issue. It is persuasive. He's not the final authority, but it's persuasive. On the other hand, Mr. Pelleggi, being the charming guy that he is and very persuasive in general, is what I call a hyper-technical argument about roads and driveways. And then Mr. Bear has an equally good one, which is, it already exists, whatever it is, driveway, road, it's there. I want to go back to something I was trying to say earlier about roads and driveways. As a town attorney, I'll tell you how I see roads. You know, the thing about roads, you can create them a whole bunch of different ways in the town. You can lay them out, and you can do this and that. For a town, and as a town attorney, what you want to do is have a road be different than a driveway, mainly so that you can, the planning board can force people to make it 50 feet wide, have the bed on it, have the culverts and so on. And all of that is so that you can go to town meeting and have acceptance, so you can dedicate and accept. And the problem that I've seen over the 24 years I've been in Maine is you have all these little tiny little roads, fire truck can't get down it, and so on. So they seem to make this 16 roads and driveways so they can force to have the roads of a standard size, so they can make them into roads and streets.
That sounds sensible.
But I think if you make a decision either way,
Well,
you should do whatever you want, because
This is a matter of law, one way or the
That's right.
other. And unless the attorneys tell me that they have no sources of authority at all, and we're making it up as we go along, I would ask them to see what they can find out. I mean, it seems to me that it's the basic question on which this decision turns.
And I agree, and I researched the hell of it, and I didn't find anything. So I think you should decide what's in your heart, as Jimmy Carter would say, and move forward.
The law is not in my heart.
There you go.
I have a question that might be off the grid, and I don't care if it is or not. Before this all came up, Pointy Head has been there for centuries. What was the back acreage used for?
Residential.
Nothing.
About
Nothing.
farmland.
But before I bought it, it was a bread and breakfast and an antique shop.
I remember
And the
that.
driveway was the access to those commercial activities. I chose not to do that. At that time, I didn't know I would run into this, or I would have continued some type of, but the planning board said they're
still
not
do it.
going to, it cannot be retroactive. But it was a commercial activity
I
for
remember
many,
that.
many years, about 30 years.
Okay.
But it has to do with seaworthy activity or something, right?
Well,
Taking claims.
But
I don't know if I'm allowed to talk or not.
I know.
I know I was off the grid, I just wanted to get your
We're not
attention.
fact-finding at this
Right.
point.
my understanding,
Our
though,
job.
was that the commercial activity ceased in about 2001.
Mm.
We stayed there for many years before we bought a place here. So, yeah, we used to stay at the B&B, but that has not been in operation for more than 20 years. And I think the town says that non-conforming uses are good, valid for 1 year after the discontinuance.
I was just wondering about the
of it,
back
you know.
acres,
And, yeah,
farms.
Yeah.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Any views, gentlemen?
They've already said their bit.
I appreciate the opportunity. I feel like I've aired everything that I have for you.
Okay.
I don't know what I can do to help you. You've listened to me, and I know it makes the board uncomfortable, but I'm using the actual language.
What makes me uncomfortable is there's gotta be some law here,
So,
so.
so it's, the ordinance tells us what we have to do because it defines roads and driveways differently. And even if we use the table of uses, it doesn't talk about driveways. And to me, that's what we're stuck with.
Mr. Chairman, just a
Yes.
question. My understanding is, as a Board of Appeals, our responsibility is to determine whether the planning board made an error. Okay? Is that,
True.
not, that is not it. So, our decision is, and I've heard both of them say, I can argue both sides. Well, I don't know about you, but that says to me that somebody has to decide. And the planning board decided. Okay? It's not our job to sit in their place and say there's a clear definition in here that you ignored or a clear provision that you ignored. I just don't understand how we can substitute our judgment in this hearing for how many, how long, how many hours? You know, in your filing, you indicated that we should probably review, it looked to me like about 30 hours of videotape. All right? I mean, that's what it sounded like. I mean, it was date after date after date of things that we should review. And yet, no one says this is clear. You don't say it's clear, you say it's clear. But again, our responsibility is, did they make an error? And so far, I haven't heard anything that says they made an error. They made a judgment, okay? But I don't see it that it's our capacity to determine that they made an error.
I don't agree with that. And the rationale is twofold. First of all, when I was in law school, I was in a moot court with Innes Christie, the former dean of the school and federal arbiter at the time, and head of the Workers' Compensation Board, a very famous guy in Nova Scotia. And I made the mistake of saying something, telling him what the law was. And he slammed his open hand down on the desk and said, I am the law, which is true. He's the judge, he's the law in that courtroom. Right or wrong, he makes the law. Here, you make the law. I was saying about following your heart. I was being facetious. What you're going to do is you're going to make the law right now. You're going to decide. So you make the law. Secondly, the standard's different. When it comes to, you could get into the complex wording of the ordinance, basically if you have a decision on a factual matter, what you're looking at is the Board of Appeals should say, was there no reasonable evidence that, you know, would it be arbitrary and capricious of them to change this? Is it wacko? all the facts that stacked up, and you give them, as you said, great deference. But that's not the case with a legal matter. This is a legal matter. You guys make the law. You're the law. You're gonna decide. So as to what said or didn't say, doesn't matter. Because the planning board can do whatever they want on legal questions, and you can just go, that's wrong, if you have a reason to overturn it. It's a different standard. You decide on legal matters. You're the law. And I can't help you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Anybody else? I'm having a problem. I was hoping that someone would volunteer to go back to the books and see if there really was anything on this issue. I can't believe that an entire state never faced this issue before in a recorded way. I mean, it's just, I come from a state where there's a lot more activity, a lot more population. Doesn't make it better, it just means you got a lot more stuff in the books. And the fact that there's nothing in Maine that 3 able attorneys are aware of, it takes me aback a bit. I'll entertain a motion from anyone on any subject.
I move to deny the appeal.
On the basis that
The planning board did not err in its decision.
I'll second.
I reluctantly must agree. If we're without guidance from any source on what I think is the basic issue, then it's hard to say that the planning board was wrong.
So that means the planning board or somebody has to go back and do it again.
No. The motion is to
Do they have a right
deny
to
the
re-
appeal.
But can they reappeal something the other way?
he can go to court.
Okay.
He can appeal our decision.
Which they're gonna go
And
anyway.
then if Mr. Barrett goes to court, what he would do is,
I think they'll do anyway.
Court of Appeals
6
would
o'clock.
look at the planning board
My
decision.
dinner's.
Okay,
They would do what we're doing.
all in favor of the motion, or did anybody want to talk more about it? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. All right, the appeal is denied, basically for the reasons that Mike Hayes expressed. I personally feel very frustrated, not blaming anybody for it. It's a shame that we don't have better guidance. So, yeah, Mike.
It's just, and this is really to you. Oh, God. What am I doing? Could they not request a variance? Or is that zone just inviolate as far as state law is
They have an
concerned?
expression, my wife's just walking in, they have expressions, for instance, Bonchance avec ça.
Talk to us too. Hey,
Bonchance avec ça, which is good luck with that. I mean, yeah, they can apply for a variance, but I've never, I've seen one variance granted, which was in regard to the Camp Beach Cliff, because everybody wanted to help the kids to walk on this boardwalk. And I argued against it as the attorney for the town of Mount Desert. So variances are extremely rare. They can apply it. I don't think they're gonna get it.
Well, on the other hand, there are 5 people to vote on it.
Could start selling fish.
It's been tried here. There isn't one, but they tried to do it.
Fish fry.
What's gonna happen though is Mr. Bear can appeal to court and all that. I wanna
Yeah.
talk about Mr. Pelleggi's second appeal. Do you wanna talk about that and get that set up in the timing of it?
I don't know that we need it, do we?
Well, it's out there, unfortunately.
Well, you can withdraw it, or you can pursue it.
I think that I would prefer that it get noticed and that this board find it to be moot and dismiss it. I guess I can withdraw it. I'll withdraw it. Yeah, with the board's permission, I'd like to withdraw that appeal.
Okay, anybody object to that? The board? No, you don't.
And I don't think he needs to send in anything in writing, because we've all heard of him,
Yeah.
and it's on the record.
Okay, that's fine, that's good.
That'd be good.
And is there a record?
Yeah, it's being recorded as we speak.
Yeah, smile, Mr. Barrett.
There's cameras, there's,
Big Brother is watching.
I have said some bad things that were caught on tape, trust me, there's a record.
I know.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for not talking to you, it's terrible.
Nice job.
They should have seen the guy, Ms. Christie, but
But-
he was just in the middle
All
of
right,
the
take care.
scared the life out of everybody. He
I
said,
think you're right,
look,
you know,
I am the law.
if there
And
is
then
no
afterwards,
clear
follow-up
precedent
said, don't ever
you know, for
You guys-
something,
you
you know,
should've stared at
like
me by now.
this, that we can look at, so the, you know, Maine State Supreme
I
Court
didn't want to be stared
decided
at.
X.
Chair, I thought chair would have
It's
people
like,
lie
how-
on me, so.
you know, I just don't feel comfortable substituting, you know, my reading of this material for 30 hours of hearings by the planning board. I just don't. Oh, I'm sorry, anyway, I just was complimenting. Great meeting. Okay.